Story 1. Can't switch with one preacher? I'll switch with the other.
Forgive me if this isn't formatted well. I've followed this thread for a long time, but only just created this account to post this story. Names have been changed. For context, I am a pastor in a large denomination that takes years to become fully recognized or ordained as a clergy person. There are several interviews with different teams to see if a person is fit to serve. When this story occurred, I was already past 4 steps and working on the last and final step to be ordained. Part of this step required recording and submitting a sermon on one of only a set number of biblical texts. Sermons using outside texts would not be accepted. At the time, I was an associate pastor in a relatively large church, almost 1,000 on a Sunday between multiple services, and I was initially hired to be one of the primary preachers. However, the senior pastor would set the sermon series, sermon topics, and scriptures for each Sunday. We were asked to stay on theme and on topic for any service in which we preached. Soon after I arrived at this church, the senior pastor, who had been there for many years, announced their retirement. An interim would take their place until the next long-term pastor was selected. We'll call this interim Pastor Richard. The first time I met with Pastor Richard after the former pastor's retirement and his start, he told me that he didn't think I had what it took to be a pastor. He then proceeded to strip me of nearly all my pastoral responsibilities. Prior to his arrival, I regularly preached 3 or 4 Sundays a month, was called for visits, and oversaw the sacraments. After the meeting with Pastor Richard, the first was relegated to organizing a team of 125 volunteers, ensuring we had liturgists, ushers, greeters, and parking lot attendants. My preaching was also cut to just once a month, at best. And even though I was working on my paperwork for the final step toward ordination, Pastor Richard refused to schedule any of the biblical texts required for the sermon for my ordination paperwork. To his credit, he did say that I could use whatever verses from the Bible that I wanted, so long as I stayed on theme for the sermon and series. However, I refuse to bend scripture to say something that it doesn't. If a text is about forgiveness, I won't try and proof text it to make it fit a theme of justice. Somehow, every time I was scheduled to preach, the theme of the sermon did not fit any of the handful of texts I was allowed to preach for my paperwork. For anyone curious, it was also a requirement that the sermon be delivered in the church you were serving at the time, meaning I couldn't fill in for someone else in order to complete the task. Eventually, Pastor Richard's interim tenure was drawing to a close. There was one Sunday between his departure and the next senior pastor's arrival. That Sunday was not part of a sermon series and did not have a selected theme. It was preacher's choice. This would have been perfect, because I could get at least one sermon recorded for my paperwork to submit. Usually you'd want to record all of the texts so that you could choose the best one of the group. However, I was not scheduled as one of the preachers for any of the services. The 2 scheduled preachers for Sunday were Greg and Sarah. Greg was not a pastor and was not on track to become a pastor. So, I went to Pastor Richard and asked if I could take Greg's place so that I could record at least one sermon for submission for ordination. Richard told me that I could not switch with Greg and he would not allow me to take his place. I agreed that I would not take Greg's place and left his office. But shortly after I left Richard's office, I went over and met with Sarah. I knew she wanted that particular weekend off. So I offered to switch preaching assignments. I would take the weekend I wanted and she would switch for a weekend a month down the line. Sarah immediately agreed and I went to the person who sent out our weekly email and had the information switched. I did not ask permission and I did not tell Richard what I had done. The email went out on Wednesday night and on Thursday morning when Richard came in, the first thing he did was come into my office. He demanded to know why I disobeyed his order. I simply pointed out that he told me I couldn't preach in Greg's place, which I wasn't. Instead, I would preach in Sarah's place. There wasn't much he could do because the information had already been sent out to the church, so he left my office in a rage. I preached on Sunday, using one of the required texts and used it to submit for the final step in my ordination. Unfortunately, I was not ordained that year. It would take me another year beyond that. But, the look on his face when he realized I had followed his order to the letter and there was nothing he could do about it still makes me chuckle years later.
Comment 1. Well, call this interim Pastor Richard. And call him Pastor Dick for short, which I see he's earned. Comment 2. You didn't say why Pastor Richard had it in for you. Do you know? Comment 3. So, basically churches are like another company. Nice to know.
Comment 4. Religion is weird.
Comment 5. The fact that Pastor Richard said you could use whatever verses from the Bible you wanted as long as you stayed on theme for the sermon and series is a big red flag. That smacks of irresponsible teaching, starting from your own beliefs and then reverse engineering the Bible to support them. Welcome to Our Lady of the Tail Wagging the Dog. Perhaps we could change that to the tail wagging the God? Haha. The Bible is an incredible book with so much truth and beauty, and it's a shame when people don't bother learning what the Bible is and how we got it. Using it for fortune cookie snippets to prop up whatever topic Richard feels like talking about is literally taking things out of context. Comment 6. Nice screen name. Ever watch the TV show Irreverent? There's an American version that I haven't gotten around to watching, and an Aussie one which is great.
Story 2. You want me to do what AI tells me? Cool.
I work for a marketing agency as a content strategist. I've been in my current role for 3 years and in the industry for nearly 20. The owner is in love with ChatGPT. He's in love with it to the point that he's having it create our marketing campaigns. He has one of his outsourced, from a developing country, employees, who has zero marketing background whatsoever, plug in a list of keywords to chat, then somehow it comes up with the topics for emails and social media posts. It also creates bullet point lists of what should be on these materials. The employee then chooses the most relevant topics, includes the bullet points, and creates an outline. I have said at least a half dozen times this isn't working. The AI program is spitting out absurd stuff that makes no sense. It's recommending contradictory and sometimes dangerous tips for the posts. Owner is insistent. The computer knows best. It reminds me of Michael Scott driving into the lake because the GPS told him to. Only it's not funny. It's infuriating. So I'm done. I have decided to comply. Want to know the results? Obviously, the specific details are changed. Client, XYZ Electric. Service we're promoting, rewiring during home renovation for building permit/inspection purposes. Social media/newsletter topics. Plus how to rewire a house after a house fire. Plus how to prevent a house fire. Plus how to wire smoke detectors. Plus how to know if you need a carbon monoxide detector. Plus how a house fire leads to water damage. I wish I were kidding. I created social posts for each of these and sent them along to the person in charge of uploading them to the various platforms. She is also an outsourced employee, but she will catch it and will most likely send it for clarification to the owner, as she's done this before when things don't make sense. I'm waiting for my boss to flip his crap on Monday. I don't even care. I cannot deal with this lunacy any longer. I refuse to do any thinking because he wants ChatGPT to do the thinking for me. Anyone need a content strategist?
Comment 1. How a house fire leads to water damage. Solution: don't put out the house fire. Thanks, AI. Comment 2. How will the boss blame you for letting them be so stupid? Comment 3. Make sure you get paper trail to CYA.
Comment 4. To me, this is exactly the danger of AI. Not that it can replace a lot of jobs, but that managers who don't understand what their employees do think it can. I understand OP here wasn't replaced, but that's the next step where the employees who know better are no longer around to point out the problems.
Comment 5. You love that. Asked ChatGPT about a certain topic I had to write an essay about and asked for evidence. The provided links didn't work and the suggest court rulings didn't exist or were complete off topic. Comment 6. Holy hell. I am so sorry. As someone who uses ChatGPT for aspects of my job, I can say that when used by someone who has been trained how to pro.pt it, who's been trained how to avoid bias, how to see bias, how to use follow-ups, it can be amazingly useful. But dumping in keywords and thinking it's going to produce intelligent content is delulu. Tell your owner that ChatGPT is only as good as the driver.